do the Disney Channel thing. I always love when they showed the ones where they don't add the effect, and it's like they didn't even come close to making the right shape.
They trace how they actually did it.
Yeah.
Well, hello and welcome back to Midweek Mashup. Today I'm sitting down with Pastor Eric, and we're kicking off our series through the book of James.
Yes.
We are very excited to start this series.
Yeah.
I believe our young adults actually went through the book of James recently.
That's right.
So,
yeah, that's right.
This might be familiar to some of you who are involved in that group,
Yeah.
but I'm excited that we get to at least go a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And so James was the brother of Jesus.
Yes.
Which I think you mentioned in your sermon must have been a really weird relationship.
I can't imagine. Yeah. Half brother, technically.
Right. So what did we kind of talk about on Sunday?
Yeah, so one of the things about James that I really like is he's so similar to the teachings of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Like the themes that James is really going deep in on are themes that were a part of Jesus' teaching and the way he did ministry. And I think that's really good because, a lot of times what we get when we read, let's say, the letters of Paul, mm-hmm. He's usually dealing with some, random pagan or philosophical influence on Christianity, which is good and necessary, and it shows us how to be contextual. But it's always some like niche thing that they're dealing with, like some argument about circumcision or some argument about like the nature of Jesus, which is, again, it's important and it's good stuff. And James just is like, this is how we're supposed to live. This is what it means to be transformed people in light of who Jesus is and what he taught us. This is what we're supposed to be about. And I kind of like that because sometimes you're reading a New Testament letter and you're like, well, I see why this was relevant for the people at the time. I don't personally have arguments about circumcision, so it doesn't really help me much, but I can, you can figure out how that kind of shapes the way we do theology. Whereas James is just, let's get right to the heart of the matter. Here's what's really important, and let's not mess around. And so, so on Sunday he comes right out of the gates and he's just like, hey, be proud if you're poor, and be humble if you're rich. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I kind of went on a tirade about being rich. And, I think it's one of these interesting themes in the Bible that, you'll read a thing in Proverbs and it'll say, do this and you'll be successful. And it doesn't always actually ring true. Yeah. It's just like these kind of like little nuggets of wisdom that aren't universally true. And we still and have always kind of lived in a world in which, like, well, if you're doing well, that's because you're a good person and you've done things the right way. And a lot of what Jesus says, a lot of what James says, a lot of what Mary, the mother of James and Jesus, says is that's not necessarily the case. That often people have gotten to a high position because they've trampled on others, and that's a big no-no in God's economy. So I spent a lot of time talking about being rich and the acknowledgement that if we live in the Bay Area of California, we're likely rich, even though we don't think of ourselves as rich because we don't maybe have a golden toilet or whatever. But just in the grand scheme of the world, that we are, on the upper tier of that. And one thing I could have gone on and on and on about that I just mentioned briefly is we always want to compare to those who have more than us. We never really want to compare to those who have less than us. And that was something that was interesting about our trip to the Dominican Republic was, people who traveled to a country like that for the first time and just saw the level of poverty that we saw all around us, and yet people are people, and people are filled with joy, and people don't live less than lives because they don't have all the stuff that we have. And I think that was a good thing for me to re-experience, but for some people on our team who've never traveled to a place like that to see just the myths and the lies that we believe about money that's going to fulfill us. And usually all it is going to do is distract us and pull our attention away from what's important. And so that's a big part of James chapter 1. And like I said, he doesn't mess around. He just gets right into it, which is, similar to his brother. But yeah, James is a great book though, because it recenters us on what's most important. And that's what I hope we see come out through the rest of the series, that God doesn't look at the outside. He doesn't look at the superficial. He looks at the deeper things, and the deeper things are about how do we care for people? How do we demonstrate faithfulness to God in the ways that we interact with one another, the words that come out of our mouths, all that stuff's really important. So yeah, rambling, but that's kind of what we touched on Sunday.
You mentioned the Dominican Republic trip.
Yes.
And we spent a good chunk of time sharing stories on Sunday about that. And so hopefully we can get some folks down to record and share a little bit more about their experiences. But just for the folks who kind of are hearing about this or may have heard a little bit leading up to it, like, why the Dominican Republic? Yeah. Like, what was the goal with going there?
That's good. Yeah, so we just recently added Jeff and Vicki Rogers as a ministry partner, and they're a part of an organization called Manna Global Mission. And so I know Jeff from my doctoral studies at Northern Seminary, and that's how we became friends. And we really wanted to partner with them because they're doing a Dominican Republic version of what we're doing here, which is trying to be highly contextual. We're trying to reach a very specific place, and that means we have to develop ministry that does that. And so that means we can't just go to any church's website, see what they're doing, and copy and paste. That won't make sense here, right? And they're doing similar things in the Dominican Republic. And one of the things that I love about what they do is, they're these kind of white, highly educated Americans. And instead of using that as something to take advantage of, they use that to empower local leaders. And so the people who are the people really driving the ministry are not Jeff and Vicki. They're helping equip and empower those local leaders to be doing that. And so we just got to participate in that. We just got to go down there and help them do something that they dreamed about doing for a while, which is run a sports camp. And then there's some needs in the children's home there, so that the kids who live on the manor property and are being cared for by their staff, it needs to feel more like a home and a place of love, as opposed to like an institution, which is kind of what it was in the past. And so they've made some really good strategic changes, and you can already see the children's home coming to life. And so we were really just there to support these initiatives and give manpower so they could pull those things off. And it was an incredible experience, one, just because we got to meet so many great people and spend a lot of quality time together as a team and with their team. But it was also just great to see like what God is doing here, he's also doing there, and it looks different, but it's God works through presence, and to see a group that's just truly present to what God is doing there, learning the context. Jeff likes to use the phrase missional and incarnational. Like, you could be missional, but just oblivious to what actually needs to be happening on the ground. The incarnational piece is being fully invested into a place and its culture, so that you can appropriately meet the needs and demonstrate Jesus. So, long way of saying they're doing what we're doing there, and it was a great experience for our team. Great relationship builder for those who went on it, but also just God speaks to you when you're in those intense kind of sacrificial missional type of experiences, and then the idea is, how do we make sure that we don't lose that? That we can't duplicate it because it was 24 hours a day, but we can remember what is it that made it so special, and those things can happen here. Nothing that happened there can't happen here. So,
You guys did a sports camp, right?
Yes.
What was the most fun sport that you got to play with the kids?
I spent a lot of time with the soccer playing because I don't know, I just did, and and it was a lot of fun. I thought, I've coached a lot of sports around here, and so I know how competitive teenage boys can be, and I was like, I may have to break up some fights. And what was cool about the whole thing was the most competitive, like probably the most talented, but the most competitive one or two, 17, 18-year-old boys in the championship game. Their team ended up losing, and the first thing they did was went and like shook the hands of the other team. And I'm like, man, they're way more mature than I would have been. I'd have been like mad and whatever. And so it was just a really fun experience. Like, yeah, it was competitive and sweaty. Oh my gosh, it was so humid that it was just like you sweat from the time you get up till you go to sleep. But we had a great time, and yeah, it was a blast. And it just helps you, doing things like that just helps you connect with people, right? Like if you love sports and somebody else loves sports, like the language barrier, the cultural barriers kind of go away pretty quickly, and you figure out just how to be in relationship with people. It was super fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us. If you want to hear more from Pastor Eric, I'll go ahead and add a banner to his message from James chapter 1. But if you enjoyed this midweek mashup, we have some more content for you right here.